Hi, folks. Welcome to The Way I See It, which is my podcast on all things money, personal finance, the economy, and all that, right? This week, I want to talk about a nice book that I read a long time ago. It's titled Who Moved My Cheese? It's by Spencer Johnson. If you haven't read it, you should read it, right? It's a bestseller, about 28 million copies sold, right? So the book is really about change, how individuals or organizations, even nations, react to change. And it's a pretty smart book, very simple. It uses four characters, or should we say four mice, to talk about organizational change, right? And the plot is pretty simple. You have these four mice that live in a maze, and every day the mice wake up and then they go look for cheese, and they always find the cheese in this particular spot in the maze, and then they eat the cheese and they're happy. So every day they wake up, find the cheese, eat the cheese, they're good, right? One day they wake up, go look for the cheese, they can't find the cheese. So, in essence, the book's about what then happens when these four mice do not find cheese in the maze. There are four guys: Ham, Horse, Corey, and Snape. But we're going to focus on the main character, who is a guy called Ham. Ham is the mice that he can't find his cheese, right? So he's beside himself with anger. He's like, who moved my cheese? Where is this cheese? This cheese is always here. Who took it from where it's supposed to be? And he refuses to go look for new cheese. He refuses to do anything. He's just mad. Then he starts to feel sorry for himself. Why would they do this to me? But they know I need my cheese every day. Why would they take it from me? And what do they want me to do now going forward? So he's stuck there. The other mice go out, go find new cheese, and move on. His friend starts to stay with him, eventually moves on, gets more cheese and goes away. So, I mean, it's a very simple concept. You can see what the guy is trying to talk about. You are faced with change, and instead of adapting to change, you start to question, hey, who moved my cheese? Who moved my typewriter? Who moved my color television? That sort of stuff. You're not changing or adapting to change that has occurred, right? And it's simple to ask and say, why didn't the mice just move? Why didn't Ham, that's his name, why didn't he just move and find new cheese? But when you consider that many organizations, even nations, are in the exact same spot as him, we see change, but instead of moving, we start to question the change, start to ask who moved our crude oil. That's what I want to talk about this week. And of course, our subject is Nigeria, right? And if you don't know Nigeria, I can introduce her to you. Nigeria is the largest country in Africa by population, right? So one out of every five Africans in Nigeria. Nigeria also has got the largest deposits of crude oil in Africa. So Nigeria is literally addicted to crude oil. 70 or 80% of the forex revenues, the foreign exchange revenues Nigeria gets comes from crude oil, right? So crude oil has funded the growth of the country, built a new city in Abuja, created this middle class in quotes. It's really that if crude oil prices go up, Nigerian economy does well. It's just that simple. But what is going on really literally is this. All over the world is trying to cut back on fossil fuels. So there's crude oil and there's gas. And the world is basically saying these two sectors, these two products are polluting. They're creating carbon and they are warming up the globe. And if we continue down this path, the world will end or whatever. So the world is trying to move away to cleaner sources of power. And of course, Nigeria, being a major oil and gas exporter, is right in the crosshairs of this change that is happening globally. To be specific, President Joe Biden, I think it was last week, ordered the US government agencies to immediately stop financing carbon intensive fossil fuels projects overseas. He wants them to prioritize international collaborations that deploy clean energy technology, right? Clear statements: stop funding fossil fuels, prioritize clean energy. So, in effect, stop funding oil and gas, prioritize solar, wind, and all that. Clear message from the President of the United States of America. What this means is that US Exim development agencies will no longer fund any project, right, in developing world or even anywhere in the West, right, that is based off fossil fuels or emits carbon and all that. Not just that, at the COP26, the conference on climate that we just had at Glasgow, all these nations pledged to no longer fund or support international fossil fuel energy development. Allow me to read out the names for you for a purpose, right? So you've got the US, you've got the UK, you've got the Netherlands, you've got Switzerland, you've got Belgium, you've got Canada, you've got Denmark, you've got France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Sweden. For good measure, you've got the Vatican also in there. So literally all the big boys in Europe together with their development agencies. So you have the ADF, the French ADF, the Dutch FMO, the US XM, all these guys have signed a pledge essentially saying that going forward, they will no longer fund oil and gas sectors, right, globally. Also, the European International Bank, they're all just going to stop, right? And what about the private banks, right? So in the US, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Bank of America. This is the big boys now, essentially saying they will not fund fossil fuels drilling in Alaska. This is just Alaska, right? But you can see where the story is going. If they can stop Alaska, then slowly they will start to remove themselves from across the world. But the picture is pretty clear that if you're in the oil and gas business, you are not going to get funding going forward, right? This is a picture. This is the change that has happened. It's not a will it happen. This is the reality that we find ourselves now in an oil and gas environment. What is particularly troubling for me is this: they're stopping funding for oil, which I understand, but gas, they're including gas as quote unquote dirty energy. So, whilst we can understand crude oil being dirty, gas that is supposed to be clean, right? So, it's also included in this list of projects that will not be funded. So, the Nigerian liquefied natural gas project is in the crosshairs as well. This is a big problem, guys. This is a very, very big problem for Nigeria and even for the developing world because if you can't get funding to fund project, then the project dies. It doesn't matter how good or how many people is going to raise out of poverty. If you can't get project financing, then you really can't do any project. And this is the big, big worry for me. It's also a worry for the vice president of Nigeria. Professor Yemi Osinbajo was in Dubai, where he gave a keynote address at the World Liquefied Petroleum Gas Association conference, right? And let me quote what he said. He said, and I quote, "It is worrying that a growing number of wealthy nations have banned or restricted public investment in fossil fuels, including natural gas." Then he continues, "Such policies do not distinguish between different kinds of fossil fuels, nor do they consider the vital roles when these fuels play in powering the growth of developing economies, especially in sub-Saharan Africa." Well said, Prof. I think he's right on the money. I want a clean environment. I want to bequeath a clean environment to my kids, right? Everybody on earth wants a clean environment. But if you pull that band-aid off too quickly, there's going to be a lot of pain. I'm not talking about just physical pain. Imagine the world where you go tell Saudi Arabia and Nigeria that listen, you can't export crude oil again. Then what should they do? What will they do? Where are the jobs going to come from? Where is the income going to come from? I've gone to the north of Nigeria, and you stand and there's not a tree in sight. No tree in sight in some parts of the far north. Why? Because all the trees are cut for firewood to make coal or to make coal to basically power the stoves. Why? Because gas is so expensive, right? So the only way they can power or cook food and stay warm is to cut trees. So they're cutting the trees because that's the only thing they can do. So gas would look like a natural replacement. You give them gas canisters, they can cook, and then they can then leave those trees alone, right? So it's got to be hand in hand. You simply can't go and say we're going to stop funding oil and gas from today going forward without actually looking and seeing how is oil and gas contributing to jobs, to national securities in this nation that you want to go stop production. I think I see the intent. I mean, intent is always good, but the practice is where we're going to have a lot of problems. So this is now the cheese, right? So this is Nigeria is in the maze. And the cheese used to be crude oil. And now the crude oil has been taken away by the West, all those countries we have named. So, what has now been the response of Nigeria to this removal of our cheese? A good one. I watched the clip. I think that clip was in 2019. I had not seen it before. It was two Nigerian senators, right? So one senator was arguing for Tesla cars, for renewables, that listen, let's go into renewables, let's start to anticipate this change coming. This senator was arguing in 2019 that there's change coming. I think that was Ben Murray Bruce, right? There's change coming, said Senator Murray Bruce. And let's prepare ourselves for this change because it's going to happen whether we like it or not. And I was surprised to see the other senators saying, no, 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 we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't encourage electric vehicles. We should actually, and I'm quoting him here, frustrate the adoption of electric vehicles because electric vehicles cost Nigeria to sell less crude oil and gas. So, in effect, he's saying electric vehicles will reduce our sales of crude oil, hence, we should frustrate them. I don't think that's a very, very smart way to approach this. Like I said, I am on the side of I don't agree with the ban, but I understand the ban. It's much better to prepare for the ban and then say this is going to happen. How can we start to prepare our economy and our people to not feel this effects in a very, very harmful way? I think that would have been a better solution or a better way to address this question of the cheese, or should we say in this case, the crude oil now moving away. And so we can actually copy what they are doing in Saudi Arabia. So just like Nigeria, Saudi Arabia is also a large oil producer. I think Saudi Arabia is what we call a swing producer. They can produce a lot of oil at very, very low prices, and they can swing the prices of crude oil going up and down, right? Now, Saudi Arabia is divesting into renewables. The Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, that is the public investment fund, invested 3 years ago 1.3 billion United States dollars in Lucid. Yeah, Lucid makes electric cars. So they invested 1.3 billion in Lucid. Today, that investment is worth 47 billion US. So they invested 1.3, they got 47. But I don't think they need the money per se. I think the point is that they are divesting away from crude oil into electric cars. They also make crude oil, but they're investing in electric cars. They also bought Tesla. They own almost 8 million shares of Tesla. I think they've sold it now, and they also bought Uber. So to them, they're not arguing that, oh, crude oil must stay, oh, could we sell crude oil? So let's make sure we do a lobby and keep crude oil. They see the change happening and they are taking steps to prevent their economy totally collapsing when crude oil goes, right? And there's a quote here by the Saudi oil minister, and he's saying here, this is very prescient. He's saying, we recognize, I'm quoting him, we recognize that eventually, one of these days, we are not going to need fossil fuels. We're talking about the world will need fossil fuels. And he says, I don't know when, in 2040, 2050, or thereafter. Then he then continues, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia plans to become a global power in solar and wind energy and could start exporting electricity instead of fossil fuel in the coming years. So Saudi Arabia, a crude oil producer that has more crude oil than Nigeria, has a plan to start to export renewable power from solar and from wind, not exporting fossil fuels. This, I believe, is the way Nigeria should have responded to change that is not just coming, is here. To argue that we want to frustrate electric cars, to me, is a fool's argument because it will come, and when it comes, you will then have no strategy or no time to implement your strategy. Nigeria, as at last month or so, I heard, was still going to borrow to invest in the Dangote refinery. They had approved 2.7 billion to be invested in Dangote refinery, and the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, I think it's now a limited company now, was going to borrow in forex to invest in a fossil fuel refinery. Nigeria needs the Dangote refinery, that is true. But Saudi invested 1.3 billion and got 47 billion. Nigeria is investing 2.7 billion in a fossil fuel industry that is going to have its funding compromised going forward. I think you can see the two responses to change. While Saudi Arabia has left cheese and has moved on from that maze, Nigeria is stuck in that maze and is basically asking the question, who moved my cheese? That's what Nigeria is basically asking. Change is hard. Change is hard. But there's a quote in that same book, Who Moved My Cheese, I like to end with. It says, adapt to change quickly. The quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you can enjoy new cheese. That is so prescient. Nigeria literally has to stop complaining and go find new cheese. Thanks for listening, guys. Remember, we're still on Twitter, Finn Plan Kalu Ajo1. Thank you all for listening. I love you all. Take care.